Good afternoon, and welcome to the Woodrow Wilson School. Today's talk is part of the Adel Mahmud Lecture in Global Health series, established in 2007 by the Merck Company Foundation in honor of my colleague Adel Mahmud to recognize his distinguished career at Merck and his pioneering work in global health. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to share a few words about Adel. Described by a colleague as a life force of Princeton's global health endeavors, Adel currently teaches in the Woodrow Wilson School and the Molecular Biology Department. His teaching and research spans scientific and policy issues in global health and disease control, and he is deeply engaged in the Health Grand Challenge Initiative, as well as a program in global health and health policy. A global health go-to resource for students and faculty alike, Dr. Mahmud is a deeply respected voice in international health circles around the world, and a very valued member of our community. It is fitting then that today's speaker, Kenneth Frazier, is the chairman of the board, president, and chief executive officer of Merck & Company. Ken has held a broad range of senior management positions since joining Merck in 1992. Highlights of his career include serving as Senior Vice President and General Counsel, as Executive Vice President and General Counsel, and as Executive Vice President and President of Global Human Health. As President of Merck, Ken has been responsible for the company's three major divisions: Global Human Health, the Manufacturing Division, and the company's research organization. Prior to joining Merck, Ken was a partner in the Philadelphia law firm of Drinker, Biddle & Reith. He sits on multiple academic and research boards and is a member of many prestigious organizations. He received his bachelor's degree from Penn State and his JD from Harvard Law School. Before I bring up our guest, I've been instructed to tell you that following his talk, where he will speak and then there'll be Q&A, we'll have a reception on this side of Schultz Dining Room, which everybody's welcome to attend, so I hope you'll join us there. So we're quite honored to have Ken here today at Princeton. And we look very much forward to his discussion. So please join me in welcoming Kenneth Frazier.
Thank you, Dean Rouse, and thank you all for joining this afternoon. It's very, very exciting to be here to talk to all of you this afternoon about a subject that's very important to me and my colleagues at Merck. I'm delighted also to be joining you at a time in which we are doing a lecture in honor of Adel Mahmud. And Adel is, of course, a deeply respected physician scientist, but he's also a talented and passionate advocate for global health. And for me, I can say he is a valued mentor and a good friend. This afternoon, I have an opportunity to speak to you about a subject that is of great significance to the pharmaceutical industry, but more importantly to global health. And Adel was an exemplar of working at the intersection of those two things, global health and the pharmaceutical industry, while he was with Merck. And so from 1999 to 2005, Adel was president of the part of Merck that is focused on vaccine research and development. And under his leadership, Merck developed 4 new vaccines which address important areas, and they include our vaccine for rotavirus, which we'll talk about later, our vaccine for HPV, human papillomavirus, our vaccine for shingles, Zostavax, and our new combination vaccine for measles, mumps, rubella, and varicella. So as you can see, each of these vaccines has had unequivocal benefit to mankind, from infants in the case of Rototec, as well as MMRV, to adolescents in the case of Gardasil, which protects young women and men from cervical cancer, as well as other conditions. And finally, Zostavax, that helps, well, let's just call them more mature people like myself who face shingles. So I want to say again, Adel, we are honored to be here, and we're honored to support the Adel Mahmud Global Health Scholars Program, which provides outstanding students with funding for travel and research to pursue global health-related internships and senior thesis research. So again, briefly today, I want to touch on the subject of the pharmaceutical industry and global health, striving for sustainable models. Now, this topic is obviously very broad, and it incorporates sustaining and improving the quality of life for individuals across national boundaries and at all income levels. It also is about sustaining innovation and improving access to valuable medicines and vaccines. And for some of us in the industry, it's about creating new, more sustainable models for our business so that will enable us to continue discovering scientific breakthroughs while also ensuring that those breakthroughs get to the people who so badly need them. The challenge we face is, can we find ways to make sustainable access at the same time as having sustainable profitability? Can that access goal and the profitability goal be viewed as consistent and complementary goals? And I'm going to do my best to share some perspectives, not scholarly perspectives, but perspectives through the lens of my company and our experiences throughout the world. And also joining me today, I have two colleagues from Merck's public policy organization. Selena Shahakin, is deeply involved in our initiative called Saving Mothers, Giving Life, which we'll describe later. And Ken Gustafson works in the area of global public policy and is also familiar with a number of our collaborative ventures around the world. Finally, one disclaimer. Though Princeton has labeled this talk a lecture, I'm hoping that we can have an interactive, free-flowing exchange of ideas. By no means do we think we have all the answers to these problems, and I would love to hear what you have to say about it. So with a little bit of introduction, let me simply say that Merck, my company, is a company that is more than 120 years old. We have over 80,000 employees around the world who are serving patients and customers in over 140 countries. We provide medicines and vaccines and animal health and consumer products. Our mission, quite simply, is to discover, develop, and provide innovative products and services that save and improve lives around the world. Or as we often say, our job is to translate cutting-edge science into medically important products. That's an important job for us, and it's not an easy job. And we've been very fortunate in our history to have many effective leaders, including Adel Mahmud, who are deeply committed to this mission. We have a long legacy going back to our modern-day founder, George W. Merck, who said medicine is for the patient, not for the profit. And another example is Maurice Hilleman, who was a microbiologist who worked at Merck from 1957 to 1984. He discovered many vaccines, including vaccines for mumps, measles, chickenpox, hepatitis B, and pneumonia. He received the National Medal of Science and a Lifetime Achievement Recognition from the World Health Organization. And I think the best way to put Dr. Hilleman, who many of us knew and loved, into context was that his obituary, which was on the front page of the New York Times, said, and I quote, "Dr. Hilleman probably saved more lives than any other scientist in the 20th century." That's quite the obituary. So, vaccines are, of course, one of the great public health success stories. They are highly cost-effective. In fact, they're cost-avoidant. Along with contraceptives, they're among the most valuable cost-effective interventions that we have in medicine today. And according to the World Health Organization, as you can see, they help prevent more than 30 common infections. There are 3 million lives saved each year worldwide through childhood immunizations alone. But there are many more lives that could be saved if we could get these life-saving vaccines to all parts of the world, and that's what I'd like to talk about. And Merck as a company has been committed to vaccine research and production, and Gordon Douglas is here, who ran the vaccine division before Adel, and Margie McGlynn is here, who ran the vaccine division after Adel. So I think that's a reflection of the commitment of Merck people to this business, is that you have in this room 3 generations of people who ran that business spanning probably 25 years, and I thank you for your attendance today. So, as a company, innovation is at our core, as I said before. We see our responsibility is to tackle some of the world's most challenging problems. We spend nearly $8 billion a year on R&D. And we are choosing to go after medically important, difficult healthcare challenges. On the front page of today's New York Times, in the right-hand column, there was an article about dementia and Alzheimer's. And it talked about how this epidemic is growing. And we're pleased that we have in our late-stage pipeline a compound that we believe will allow us to test the dominant hypothesis around Alzheimer's, which is called the amyloid hypothesis. And I promise not to try to imitate a scientist today. But this is a very important area of medicine for us as a society. According to many estimates, by the year 2050, Alzheimer's will cost the U.S. alone $1.2 trillion. At the rate in which it's increasing, there are about 5 million people who have it today. By 2050, there will be 14 million people in the United States with Alzheimer's disease. To put that in a context, that's more people than who live in the state of Illinois. So those are the kinds of very difficult healthcare problems that we have to take care of as a company. And the challenge we have is that the discovery of these kinds of innovative, cutting-edge medicines is not predictable at all. In fact, it's completely uncertain and completely unpredictable. But when it happens, it can have a profound impact not only on our company, but obviously on society. And today we focus on 11 disease priority areas in women's health. So, turning to access. There are challenges in both the developing world as well as the developed world. In the developed world, the challenge has to do with healthcare budgets. The pressure on healthcare spending is significant in Europe as well as the United States. They're shrinking healthcare budgets. And the challenge in the rest of the world is that our business model historically has allowed us to serve the needs of 20% of the world's population, but not 80% of the world's population. So we have both the opportunity and the obligation, or as I would say, we have both a business imperative and a moral imperative to try to reduce the burden of disease and increase life expectancy all around the world. We also take seriously corporate social responsibility, which is woven into our business in a number of areas, including obviously ethics and transparency, which is critically important when you're making life-saving medicines, in terms of ensuring that we treat our employees with dignity and respect and fairness. Environmental sustainability. The work that we do in communities is important, and it's important that we take care of our precious environmental resources, including, of course, fresh, clean water. And then lastly, access to health is something that's very important. So when we talk about access to health, we have some guiding principles. The first of which is that, as a company, we will continue to engage in innovative R&D in order to provide the kinds of medicines and vaccines that address global health needs. We're also committed through manufacturing supply to getting these high-quality products to people in a reliable, safe, effective way going forward. We try to register our products in a timely fashion in markets all over the world, and we try to commercialize our products also wherever we can do business appropriately. We also have, as one of our guiding principles, the concept that we need to invest in the communities that we do business in. And that's really important because access to health is at the heart of our business. Put differently, the medicines we manufacture and discover don't have any value to people if they don't get access to them. The fact that they may be on someone else's pharmacy shelf in North America doesn't do any good to someone who lives in India or other parts of the Asian continent or Brazil or sub-Saharan Africa unless we can find a way, obviously, to get them to those people. And in order to do that, we try through our business model to address that through things like differential pricing. And I'm pleased to say that Merck was the very first company in the HIV field to come up with tiered pricing so that people in various parts of the world, particularly in the parts of the world where income is low, could have access to those drugs on a regular basis. We also try, in the right instances, to license our drugs to people, including on royalty-free and voluntary basis. We also enter into manufacturing partnerships with people who are in a position, like Indian manufacturers, to manufacture at a lower cost of goods. And finally, we have multiple collaborations including with people like the Gates Foundation, to help us develop the kinds of drugs that are necessary for use in the developing world. So we have the challenges that I've talked about in the developing world. We have obviously a huge focus on preventing disease. If we can keep people well, that's a lot better than trying to treat them after they're sick. But we also face, both in the developing and developed world, the concept that the burden of disease and the cost of treating disease is soaring, both with respect to infectious diseases, which we treat with vaccines and other medicines, but as well as with chronic diseases around the world. So let me just frame our problem as an industry as the fact that drug discovery is costly, very costly, and not predictable. Right now, for those of us who are in the industry, we are facing significant challenges, including in the capital markets, where many investors are questioning whether or not R&D spent on finding these life-saving drugs, trying to solve some of these intractable problems, and I might add, the problems that we're going after, like cancer and Alzheimer's, have been the biological and medical riddles that thus far have evaded solutions. So we're going after things that are much harder than we've gone after in the past. And people are starting to question significantly whether or not the investment, and I should make the point that when we invest money in a discovery program at Merck, often it takes 15 years from that program's inception to when we can file with the Food and Drug Administration. And as you've heard me say, it costs $8 billion a year to pursue our R&D budget. So we have challenges with respect to getting the capital that we need in order to continue to do R&D. We also have challenges when we do bring our drugs to the regulatory agencies around the world. We have to prove not only safety and efficacy as we've had in the past, but increasingly we have to demonstrate that the drugs that we're coming to market with are substantially better than drugs that were in the marketplace before. And much of the standard of care really are drugs that our company and our competitors invented many, many years ago. So in an area like cardiovascular, we have tremendous life expectancy because we can now deal with hypertension. We can now deal with congestive heart failure. We can now deal with elevated cholesterol. And those were all conditions that previously would have been a death sentence. But due to medicines that were discovered at Merck and other places in the 70s and the 80s and 90s, those medicines are available at a relatively cheap price. And so the hurdle now is not only to come up with a new medicine that is safe and effective, but is also substantially better than the last generation of medicine. You'd say, well, why do that? Let's stick with cardiovascular. Although we have very good medicines that, as I've mentioned, have substantially increased the life expectancy in the developed world, 65% of the residual risk of heart attacks and strokes and other cardiovascular disease still remain with the medicines that we have. So there's still a great deal to be done, and heart failure still is the #1 killer of people around the world. So healthcare companies are looking for new business models. The mantra around is, since our business is one that is full of failure, mostly failure, before we can find a drug that's effective and safe, we need to learn to fail fast and early before we commit substantial resources to late-stage development. We have to think globally. Historically, a company like Merck did business in the United States, Canada, Western Europe, and Japan. Increasingly, when we think about blockbusters, we're thinking about global blockbusters, geographic blockbusters, not simply what they used to be. And also, we have to be willing to increase our ability to work with others. So, the challenges we face, as I've just said, are supporting the investment in R&D, trying to find a way to optimize both the quality and the efficiency of our processes, and collaborating. I'd like to talk for a minute about a program called the Mectizan Donation Program, which is one of our signature corporate responsibility programs, which began in 1987. It was a groundbreaking public-private partnership, and now we're 26 years later, and we are now treating more than 1 billion treatments of Mectizan for river blindness, which is an insidious, terrible disease that affects people in Sub-Saharan Africa, South America, Yemen, and other places. And what makes it such a horrible disease is that in those areas, it often affects people who live in the most arable land, close to fresh water. It's a black fly that actually invades the body, and the larvae go into the bloodstream, and they work through the bloodstream, and they cause a number of issues, including horrible itching and disfigurement of limbs. And in many cases, the larvae go through the bloodstream to the eyes, and they begin to, in effect, eat the eyes from the inside out. So in areas of the world, you have a very common thing shown in this picture of the little boy leading the older man along who's now blind. And we've been able to give out that 1 billion treatments in over 117,000 communities in 28 countries around Africa, 6 in Latin America, as well as Yemen. And we've been able to interrupt the disease's transmission in 4 of 6 countries in Latin America and 9 regions within 5 African countries. It is the longest running program of its kind, and I'd like to show a video about it, if you don't mind.
A remote village in eastern Nigeria. Many of the elderly have been living in the dark for decades. The cause? River blindness, which is also known as onchocerciasis. It's one of the world's leading causes of preventable blindness. For those working to control the disease, it's an affliction that strikes the entire community.
For them, once they go blind, it's a challenge socially and economically, and it affects the education of their children as well.
The World Health Organization estimates that there are more than 100 million people at risk, with 37 million infected, 800,000 visually impaired, and 270,000 blind. And millions more silently suffering from unbearable itching. For centuries, the disease plagued remote communities in Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East. There was no answer to the affliction. But thanks to a combination of scientific discovery and visionary leadership, the landscape is very different now. That's because in 1975, Merck researchers William Campbell and Mohammed Aziz suggested that the company's veterinary drug, ivermectin, could be reformulated to potentially kill juvenile parasites in humans. The target was river blindness, a disease in which parasitic filarial worms migrate to the eye where they die, resulting in severe inflammation and scarring. It can lead to impaired vision and blindness. Another symptom is intense itching, which often causes pigment loss, commonly called leopard skin. In 1987, after years of further research and human trials, followed by regulatory approval in Europe, Merck CEO, Dr. Roy Vagelos, made a bold promise.
At that meeting, we announced that Merck would contribute the drug free to anyone in the world who needed it, for as long as it was needed.
In order to turn the pledge into practice, Merck created an entirely new organization, the Mectizan donation program, which works with partners to support country programs. And Merck's commitment hasn't faltered.
That was a commitment by that generation of Merck management. It is a commitment that I'm happy to say on behalf of this generation of Merck management that it's our honor and privilege to actually also observe.
After 25 years, over 1 billion treatments in more than 117,000 communities, the program has set a new standard. It's become the longest-running drug donation of its kind.
Here we are 25 years later, and what was interesting, the maximum we thought in Africa at the time, people at risk, was around 45 million. We're now up to over 100 million in Africa, and they're still donating. That's a remarkable achievement, I think.
And there was more to come. When it was discovered that lymphatic filariasis or elephantiasis could be prevented when Mectizan and another drug, albendazole, are taken together, the program was expanded. In 1998, GlaxoSmithKline began donating albendazole in countries where river blindness and LF coexist, all under the auspices of MDP. In addition, innovative new strategies have been developed since the program began. One of them takes a community-directed approach, with the actual distribution of the tablets being carried out by the people who live in the towns and villages. It's an inclusive strategy pioneered by this program and its partners, and hailed as a model for other health programs.
It's very, very gratifying. It's very, very empowering for everyone, not just the people there, but for the international community to recognize that this doesn't have to be a paternalistic effort. It should be one of partnership where everyone from the very bottom to the very top can be engaged.
I would say that for all of us back here, we should take a great life's lesson from this collection of humane, rational, enlightened people who are so committed, so dedicated that they are out there day after day facing all kinds of personal hardships and dangers to ensure that this medicine can be delivered to the people who need it.
And that determination has paid off. Transmission of river blindness is thought to be interrupted or eliminated in 4 of the 6 endemic countries in the Americas, with Africa and the Middle East making significant progress. Now, thanks to the work of the partners who have been committed for decades, younger generations are able to work, play and enjoy life without the spectre of these terrible diseases.
Y se va volando.
So I think that video really gives you a sense of just what a difficult challenge we face in various parts of the world, and what a terrible, insidious disease that is, which people mostly on this part of the world would never even imagine existed. So I'd like to turn it over really quickly to Ken Gustafson, who's my colleague, to make a few comments about the program since he's so directly involved with it.
Thank you, Ken, and good afternoon, everybody. As Ken said, until very recently, I had the privilege of working directly overseeing the Mectizan donation program from a corporate perspective at Merck. And Ken's talk in the videos really hit the high points, but I just wanted to come back to a couple of elements about the program that I think are for me, are inspiring and unique and exciting and important to point out. The first is getting back to the main theme of Ken's presentation on sustainability, is how sustainable this program really is. It is a donation program, and it's a philanthropic program. And by itself, philanthropic programs aren't necessarily forever sustainable. But what's unique about this is, as we saw in the video, that this is an open-ended, essentially unending commitment. It will go on until the disease is eliminated, but until then, Merck will donate and is donating as much as necessary. And what's unique and important about that is, without that confidence and that security amongst the other partners to know that the medicine will be there year after year, the other partners would not have the confidence to come on board with their significant investments of financial resources and human resources. Governments would be reluctant to really dive in and address the problem. But because of the foundation that Merck is providing by this open-ended commitment, there really has been an explosion since 1987 of new countries coming on board, new partners getting on board, various foundations and national governments agreeing to donate to the program. And so that sustainability that's created through that open-ended commitment is really very unique. And not just for river blindness. The video talked about how Merck expanded our commitment with Mectizan to include lymphatic filariasis, another a related tropical disease, in partnership with GlaxoSmithKline. But in addition to that, over mostly the past decade, building on the model that Merck developed with Mectizan and that GlaxoSmithKline came on board with lymphatic filariasis, there's now a spectrum of donation-driven tropical disease elimination programs for other diseases like soil-transmitted helminths and trachoma and other diseases with long, semi-unpronounceable names. And there's a big momentum around trying to eliminate these diseases and intentionally setting a 2020 target for eliminating a major section of these diseases that affect billions, about 2 billion people around the world. So it's inspiring to see how it's grown from one disease to two diseases to now many diseases with a huge range of partners. The other thing that the video talked about from a sustainability standpoint is how it's not a fickle commitment. It doesn't depend on how Merck is doing as a company from one day to the next. It doesn't depend on who the CEO is at the time. You know, when I was at a meeting and the news was announced that we were getting a new CEO and it was Ken Frazier, people pulled me aside and said, what does this mean for the program? Is it going to continue? And I would put my arm around them and say, it's no problem. Ken is not going to come in, nor would any other CEO come in and say, you know what, I think we're going to change this program or we're going to stop the commitment. So that sustainability is very, very important. The other part that drives sustainability is the community-owned aspect of the program that we saw a little bit of in the video. It's not a top-down program. It wasn't Merck saying, we have this drug, and by the way, here's how you need to deliver it, and we'll be watching you every step of the way. Instead, it was the exact reverse. Merck said, we have this drug, and we were experts in developing it, and we can manufacture it, and we can get it to you. But after that, we're not public health delivery experts. So we look to ministries of health in the affected programs. We look to nonprofit organizations who specialize in this kind of drug delivery program, and the local communities themselves, and said, come up with a method that will be sustainable for you. It might be one day when everybody gets together. In some places, it's health workers that go door to door and knock on the door and say, let's measure you and see how much medicine you need. Whatever works, and they report back on the progress, and that local ownership has really driven the sustainability of the program. And so it's a sustainable program. It will continue to be sustainable until it's no longer necessary. So to me, that's inspiring. To me, it's exciting. Ken, I don't know if we want to do questions now or just wait until afterwards, but if
Why don't we take them at the end?
Yes, great. Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Another program that we're active in is a program that we call Merck for Mothers. A few years ago, our former chairman and CEO, Dick Clark, challenged Merck's leadership to develop a new way for the next generation of Merck to make a difference in the world. And unlike the Mectizan donation program, which began inside our laboratories, Merck for Mothers started with a wide-ranging search outside our company for a large global health problem with respect to which we could play a unique role in helping to solve. We ultimately focused on the seemingly ancient and intractable issue of maternal mortality, for which there is no magic bullet, no single pill like Mectizan. We were able to link to the United Nations Millennial Development Goal 5, which was a 75% reduction in global maternal mortality, and without intervention, up to 3 million women could die from complications of pregnancy and childbirth over the next decade. I mean to say, mostly preventable complications of pregnancy and childbirth. And when that happens, it obviously affects children, families, and entire communities. It is one of the biggest and most confounding health issues that challenges the world. The burden of maternal mortality falls most heavily in the developing world, but it also affects communities in the U.S., including communities right here in New Jersey. In September 2000, we announced Merck for Mothers, a 10-year, $500 million initiative to speed life-saving solutions to women, applying both our scientific and our business expertise. As a product donation program, Mectizan represents the best of what is now classic corporate responsibility, whereas Merck for Mothers reflects new thinking about how health initiatives need to be sustainable so that local governments and communities can continue the initiative without relying solely on donations. We also undertook the initiative because it allows us to learn a great deal that will benefit us as a company and a business doing business in those parts of the world. How can we get our best discoveries to the other 80% of the world that we don't currently well serve? How do we develop products that the other 80% of the world needs? How do we collaborate not just with healthcare and public partners, but also with other members of the private sector? I'd like to show a video now briefly that describes the complex challenge and the cruel impact of maternal mortality. So please. If nothing is done, 3 million women will die in the next decade. We simply cannot sit by and allow this to happen.
If you live in the West, you cannot conceive what it's like to be a pregnant woman who lives in a remote area with no access to a healthcare professional, no access to any healthcare facilities at all. But that's the reality for millions of women throughout the world.
Now, you might think that in the 21st century, maternal mortality would be limited to the developing world. Unfortunately, that's not right. No geography is spared.
Women in childbirth die because of preeclampsia. They die because of bleeding. They die because of infections. Some women die because they don't access care.
So sometimes we look at our mothers, we look at them dying, we can't do anything because we don't have these life-saving things. So we are really faced with the challenge of one midwife serving 60 mothers who are in labor at the same time.
Saving the lives of girls and women is at the heart of progress for the family. Investing in women is not only the right thing to do, but it makes enormous economic sense.
This problem, the global health problem, is too big for any one sector to tackle it by itself. What we are hoping is to be able to bring all of Merck, Merck's people, Merck's products, Merck's processes to bear on this in support of United Nations Millennium Development Goal 5, which is to reduce maternal mortality by 75%.
We're launching a 10-year, $500 million initiative to speed life-saving solutions to women and are making the fight against maternal mortality part of our mission.
As we started to develop that initiative, we spent some time asking, what can a large multinational company like Merck contribute, and where can we have an impact? And so the initiative is going to be focused on 3 elements: innovation, access, and advocacy.
The engines of scientific discovery are healthier and faster than we've ever seen. What we need to do is harness that science into products and technologies that meet women's needs.
There's a need for new tools. The private sector offer a platform for innovation, and the public sector offer a specific context on ground that we don't always have.
Merck is dedicating a team of scientists to try to help find new tools and technologies for the 3 most common causes of maternal mortality.
In countries like our country, actually our lack of awareness is an important thing. People don't know what to do, they don't know about the danger signs, and they don't come to the doctor
You know, women have been segregated and disenfranchised for a long time, but things really are turning around.
We can give those women voices, and we can help empower them and the health workers who are there to assist them to do more and do it faster to really have an impact on maternal mortality.
I mean, I think what's exciting about this issue, and it's one of the other reasons that I decided to dedicate myself to it, was that of all these hundreds of thousands of deaths, almost all of them are preventable. There's not a lot of issues you can say that about.
We're seeing success stories, and I'm hopeful that the rest of the world will see those and say, you know what, we can do that too.
What is really humbling in this is, even if you save one mother, this whole program would be worth it. And we hope to save millions.
The video describes the incredibly complex challenge of maternal mortality, and I would love to, if I could, just call on my colleague Cecilia to say a few words about it.
So I'm going to talk about Merck for Mothers and also Saving Mothers Giving Life, which is a public-private partnership that Merck for Mothers joined. The partnership is 8 months old, and I lead the secretariat of that partnership. The partners are the U.S. government, Norway, Every Mother Counts, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, and Merck for Mothers. And in this 8 months, we have actually been able to hire several hundred health workers that are being now taken over to be funded by the governments in Uganda and Zambia, which is where our pilot programs are. We have trained 7,000 health workers and volunteers to be able to ensure the quality of care that women receive when they come to health centers. We've equipped 80 facilities with operating theaters so they can perform C-sections, and also purchased ambulances and other equipment that's necessary. And in our first evaluations that are coming out, this is a very rigorously evaluated program by the Centers for Disease Control and Columbia University, we've actually found that we have a 50% increase in the number of women that are coming to health centers to deliver babies in Uganda and Zambia. We're planning to expand our program to several more countries in the next couple of years and bring in new partners. And I just wanted to tell you a story. I was in Kamwenge province in rural western Uganda last week, and I was at a health center called Intara, very far out. I can tell you it was a very long drive over dirt roads, and it was along the border with Congo. And at this health center, there was a woman there. She'd come in 2 hours before I arrived. She was brought in when they received a phone call that there was a woman high up in the mountains that was in very significant distress. There was fetal distress as well. An ambulance that had been purchased through Saving Mothers Giving Life went and picked her up. They brought her to the health center. There was a doctor there that had been hired by Saving Mothers Giving Life and an anesthetist. They ordered blood from the blood bank, recognizing her need. They found that the baby was in distress. They performed an emergency C-section because she had a ruptured uterus. They pulled the baby out. They resuscitated the baby. They sewed up the mother. They got her a blood transfusion. And 2 hours later, when I arrived, she was resting and receiving the blood transfusion. And what was really exciting about that was to see that 2 lives were saved on that day in Intara province, the mother and her baby. And we know that those kinds of saves are happening every day because of Saving Mothers Giving Life and because of Merck for Mothers. So I'm really proud and excited about that, and that's what's driving us every day. These health workers that are on the front lines in these clinics are delivering so many babies because we want them to, the women to come to the health centers, and they are working so hard and are so enthusiastic that we're just trying to support them. Thank you.
Thank you, Selena. I want to just move past this for a minute and talk about some of the other collaborations that we have that are important. They include our African Comprehensive HIV/AIDS partnerships with the Gates Foundation, our Merck Nicaraguan Ministry of Health Rototech partnership, our overall partnership with the Gates Foundation around family planning, which is a huge issue for Melinda Gates, the MSD Wellcome Trust Hillman Laboratories, which is where we try to do some of the formulation and development of important products that are targeted at those areas of the world that are poorly served, and the Richard T. Clark Fellowship for World Health, which allows us to send employees out to those parts of the world to bring their scientific and business expertise to the problems at hand. Now I'm going to stop here with this because it's time to pivot. And I want to make a confession. We're very proud as a company of what we've done from a philanthropic standpoint. But the problems of mankind, the intractable health problems of the entire world, are far too great for philanthropy. I believe that the only way that we will address them in any significant way is if we find ways to address them through sustainable business models. Because I'm now at one of the world's finest universities, oh, I apologize, Dean Rouse, at the world's finest university, it seems important and appropriate to reference what some studies have said about corporate responsibility and sustainability. A recent Harvard Business Review article by Michael E. Porter and Mark Kramer noted that corporations are not responsible for all the world's problems, nor do they have the resources to solve them all. However, they said, each company can identify the particular set of societal problems it is best equipped to resolve and from which it can gain the greatest competitive advantage. The authors continued that addressing social issues by creating shared value will lead to self-sustaining solutions that do not depend on private or government subsidies. The article said that typically, the more closely tied a social issue is to a company's business, the greater the opportunity to leverage the firm's resources and to benefit society. And the authors of a Harvard Business School paper found that what they called high sustainability companies significantly outperform their counterparts over the long term. So sustainability is an especially challenging issue for those of us in the healthcare industry because we like to think of ourselves as being in a compassionate business. And there is tension in our business model because we're trying to provide value to shareholders, patients, customers, employees, and society at large. To be blunt, our shareholders include some of the richest people in the world. And yet we have to serve some of the very poorest and underserved people in the world. Our goal of delivering value to all of our stakeholders raises lots of challenging issues, including bioethics, R&D sustainability. What does it mean to be scientifically rigorous, but at the same time providing the kinds of products that are affordable in the rest of the world? Access, quality, and of course, something that we don't always admit out loud is one of our values, our cost structure. Because we're comfortable doing business the way we've always done business. The margins are nice, the headquarters are nice, there's air conditioning, good cafeterias. And if we're really going to try to get out and serve the other 80% of the world, there's something that I think we don't always acknowledge. And that is that the company's capabilities are far more specialized and far more context dependent than we are inclined to believe. In some ways, I think of Merck as being like a Porsche. My good friend Dr. Mahmud, when he likes me on a summer day, he'll give me a ride in his Porsche so that I can be like him when I grow up. And like a Porsche, our company knows how to perform under certain conditions. You know, a Porsche is a high-performance vehicle on a certain kind of highway. But if you have to take that Porsche to places where there are no paved roads, it doesn't function nearly as well. It was designed for a specific context. And businesses, too, are designed for specific contexts. Our networks, our key customer relationships, our product design, our manufacturing costs are all based on Western market models. It's our challenge to retrofit our business to address global needs. It wasn't built for that. It's like flying an airplane and trying to change the parts while the plane is flying. It's much easier said than done. And we have to look at our own mindsets. Someone a long time ago said that culture trumps strategy. And I think what they meant is our unexamined habits and expectations are barriers that we have to overcome if we are going to do the things that we say. Earlier, I referenced George W. Merck's quote about medicine being for the patients. Medicine being for the people, not for the profits. But when George W. Merck said that in 1950, that was before the internet. That was before CNN. It was before the extent of global suffering was widely known. He could be forgiven for saying what he said in the context of Europe and North America. That was the world probably as he experienced it. But we have to ask ourselves, what does that quote mean for us today? And he went on to say, how can we bring the best of medicine to each and every person? We cannot rest until the way has been found with our help to bring our finest achievement to everyone. And that is easier said, ladies and gentlemen, than done. So our goal, including our manufacturing mission, is to be the most trusted and competitive supplier of pharmaceuticals, animal health, and consumer healthcare products, vaccines, and biologics to the world's patients and customers, while at the same time enabling our growth. And we have a goal to be able to manufacture and supply the world, to ensure that we have the internal and external supply capability to make our medicines and vaccines available, which is to say accessible and affordable to a minimum of 80% of the world's population by the end of 2015. That is really quite a big goal. And our manufacturing colleagues have taken that on. And I wanted to use one of our vaccines to illustrate the challenge that we have. We have a vaccine for rotavirus-induced diarrhea called Rototec. And what this map shows you is an example of the tremendous need around the world. This map shows what we like to call the rotavirus vaccine disconnect. So let me orient you to the map. Where you see blue on the map is where we currently sell Rototec. And each one of those red dots represents 1,000 infants who died from this condition. Last year, according to the Lancet, 453,000 infants died from rotavirus-induced diarrhea. In the West, parents are concerned when their infants get diarrhea. But by and large, our children are healthy enough to go through a few days of diarrhea, to have a little bit of pressure on their system, so to speak. But children who are on the edge from a nutritional standpoint, from a clean water standpoint, can't live with the dehydration. They can't live without digesting nutrients for a couple of days. And so that's what leads to 453,000 infants. So we have 90% of our sales in the United States. And as you see, nearly 6 billion people in the world don't have access to our products. If we could just get these children to age 10, they would live. So as you can see, we have a competitive imperative and we have a moral imperative. And this is just one example of the kind of disease that is an unmet need for treatments around the world. Another example is the availability of contraceptives. I was recently in Ethiopia. traveling with my colleagues, and we went to remote villages, and in Ethiopia, the custom is to have child brides. So these girls of 12, 13, and 14 are married off to older men in their community. Very frequently, they become pregnant. Because of the body development, the baby comes down the birth canal, and one of two bad things happens. The baby gets stuck, the mother dies, the baby dies. Or the baby forces its way into the world, with the result that the mother's body is never the same. Often they have no control over their body wastes. And so these women who are 12, 13, 14 become pariahs. They have to live on the edge of their societies because they're no longer able to control their bodily functions. So they live the rest of their lives, as, in essence, in solitary confinement. And we have to ask ourselves, as the leading manufacturer of branded contraceptives, including the best technology, we have an implantable rod that can be put in a woman's arm and can provide her with 3 or 4 years of contraceptive protection. We have to ask ourselves, are we happy, are we satisfied with selling those products where we're comfortable, where our business model is set up to sell it? So that's what leads us to say, why focus on the other 80% of the world's population? There's a business opportunity, but as you can see on the right-hand side, substantial numbers of people in the world live on extremely small amounts of money. They have very little income in those parts of the world. So, to meet our obligation, our moral obligation, and to address our business opportunity, we're taking a number of steps. The first of which is to try to develop world-class formulation development capabilities that can suit local needs. The second is to try to build a low-cost manufacturing network that includes local and regional partnerships. For example, with Indian manufacturers. The next thing is engaging in constructive dialogue about healthcare practices and policies, and gaining market access through our manufacturing process and technology transfer in places like Brazil. Lastly, we have to invest in clinical trials in these emerging markets where they're necessary to show our drugs are safe and effective and to meet regulatory, clinical, and medical needs. The good news is while we weren't very active in these markets just a few years ago, we are now the fastest growing multinational pharmaceutical company in the emerging markets. But there's still very much left to do. And so these are examples of the kind of commercial collaborations we have in places like China, India, Brazil, and Korea that are all intended to help us serve the world's most needy people. I'm just going to cite Serum Institute of India, which Margie had a lot to do with. And the agreement there is to develop and commercialize a pneumococcal vaccine for emerging and developing world countries. Pneumococcal disease is a bacterial infection that causes pneumonia, meningitis, sepsis, and other life-threatening ailments. It's estimated that at least 1 million children, mostly in these developing countries, die annually from these diseases. So the challenge we face is striving for what I call sustainable business models. Models that allow us to hit and do something about the enormous and growing human need in those parts of the world. It means remaking our entire business to address the pervasive inequalities of income and health, education, that affect people unequally and, frankly, on an undeserved basis. As I say sometimes when I'm traveling and I see these horrible things like the situation I described in Ethiopia, these young women with gynecological fistulas, I guess we could say to ourselves, by way of comforting ourselves, that we were smart enough to pick our mothers, and they weren't. Because that's the only difference, is they were born in a place where, for reasons that are completely undeserved, they face miseries that people in this part of the world could not even begin to imagine. We can't do it by ourselves, as George Merck says. We have to collaborate with committed partners like the Gates Foundations, with other NGOs, with governments around the world that have to be committed to helping their own people. And we have to do it in a way that's sustainable. As Professor Reinhardt knows, it's not an easy time to be a pharmaceutical company in the world. People still think it's the good old days of the 80s where we made a lot of money. It's not as easy today to continue to spend $8 billion a year on R&D and hope that that will produce important medicines. It's also, I have to say, very exciting because I think it gives us an opportunity to address our obligation and our opportunity to do well by the world's population. And I have to say that for many of my colleagues, while this is a scary and uncertain and uncharted set of territories that we're going into, it does give us a reason to get up in the morning. It does give us a reason to fight through the current obstacles and to feel like maybe, just maybe, if we bring our creativity to the bear, if we're willing to give up on the comforts that we have today and willing to go into new places and learn to do new things, that maybe one day people will look back at this generation of management and say they did the right thing. So thank you for your generous listening today, and I'll take your questions.
I can do it. So now, Mr. Frazier,
thank you for coming.
To take any questions. As always, you know, I always have the joy of saying this. We like to encourage the students to ask questions. And please come to the two microphones.
Thank you for your talk, Mr. Frazier.
Thank you.
You've mentioned several of the international partnerships that Merck is developing. I was wondering how the company is dealing with IP issues abroad, compulsory licensing. Your colleagues at Novartis were dealt a blow yesterday with Gleevec in India. And obviously, as the company starts expanding further globally, this would probably come up. How are you dealing with it?
It's a very good question. And for everyone here, one of the challenges that the industry faces is that our lifeblood is our intellectual property. That's basically what if you look at a balance sheet of a drug company, we have a little property, plant, and equipment and stuff. But basically, it's the patents that make our company valuable. And we face issues as we go around the world because some countries like India are fairly hostile to our patents. And he was alluding to the fact that this week the Indian Supreme Court struck down a patent for Gleevec, one of the most important cancer drugs around the world. So we've actually had our licenses taken in places like Brazil and Thailand. I think the challenge that we have is to continue to show those countries that we are doing everything in our power to actually use our intellectual property in their countries to get our medicines to their people. I think where drug companies get into most trouble is when people see us enforcing the patents and they think that they're being enforced either in a way where people can't really consider themselves to have meaningful access because of pricing, or people just don't, frankly, prosecute the patents in a meaningful way inside their country. I don't like what India did. I think that's bad for the industry going forward. I think from a legal perspective, not that I want to practice law today, I think it was the wrong decision. I think it's the kind of thing that will make it harder for people to do research in those countries. I think it's short-sighted. I think Brazil, which abrogated one of our patents in the HIV field, I think for everything we can see, the government of Brazil really regrets having done that. Because there are ways for us to work together to get these medicines to people in a more accessible way. So that's one of the big challenges we face.
Ken, I think it's great that you're here and you've told us something about some of the great things that Merck has done with regard to improving world health, but you very clearly delineated the fact that we can't do it all alone through philanthropy. And one of the areas I've gotten interested in is tuberculosis. Tuberculosis is a major killer in the poorer parts of the world. And what we discovered was that the Mercks of the world are not using their resources to develop a vaccine. So part of the problem is not just delivery of products that you already have. I mean, Mectizan, for example, was not developed for river blindness. It was developed for other purposes. HIV drugs were developed for HIV that exists in the developed world. Tuberculosis vaccines were not being developed. In 2003, we set up an organization called ARIS, whose sole purpose is to develop a tuberculosis vaccine. It's a nonprofit biotech company, a fully fledged biotech company with about 150 employees today. We have every cover every aspect that's needed for development. But the problem is, how do we develop a new drug, and how do we partner with the pharmaceutical industry to do this? And there are two ways in which we look at it. One is that Merck, and this is true for a couple of other companies, actually have products sitting on the shelf that they think are putative vaccines for tuberculosis. They were not developing because there was no market in the developed world. We have partnered with them, doing most of the work in phase 1, phase 2, phase 1 and phase 2, and in process development, early manufacturing, to mitigate the costs for them of research and development and their share costs in a phase 3 trial. They have rights to the vaccine in the developed world. We have rights to it in the developing world, and therefore we can charge an appropriate amount that's affordable in that setting. Conversely, we have some products that we've developed, which then we get up to ready to go into phase 3 trial. We don't have the capacity to do a big phase 3 trial, and we need partners who could take it with us and, again, share costs and share the eventual usage in the world. So it's a model to help with this kind of thing and another way of doing business.
I agree, Gordon, and I think that the industry is coming to the realization that we must spend more of our R&D capital on these diseases. And there was a group of CEOs who got together with Bill Gates last year and then recently last month to talk about how we could put more resources behind research and development aimed at neglected tropical diseases. And I think it's also important for us to remember that what today may seem like a disease in another part of the world, we do live in a small world. It can come here. So a couple of years ago when people talked about dengue, they talked about it as a disease that affects only certain places around the world, and now we're starting to see it in southern United States. So the world is quite small, and I think that there's lots of reasons for us to do exactly what you said, to come together in the right kinds of partnerships. And we, as you know, we have a new R&D head coming into Merck, and I'm sure he would like to have that conversation with you. Who's next?
Hi. I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about Gardasil. I know that it was originally licensed and used for girls and for cervical cancer, but it actually treats a lot of other things,
yes.
Like genital warts and cancers that affect a lot of gay men. I was wondering how you plan to market this going forward when it's for a different population that is more marginalized.
So let me first of all say that a lot of the growth for Gardasil right now is for boys. Because it does protect against not only certain cancers that affect boys, head and neck cancers and other cancers, but it also does protect against genital warts and things of that nature. And we're very pleased to see that boys are getting treated, largely because they have enlightened mothers, like my lovely spouse over there. The boys don't want to go get treated necessarily with what they think is a girl's vaccine, but their mothers actually overrule that, and I thank them for that. The other thing that we're doing is we're expanding it all around the world. And I'm very pleased to say that we've continued our research with Gardasil, which has about 90% of the global market share for HPV vaccine. We have a quadrivalent vaccine. Our competitor has a bivalent, so we go after 4 strains, they go after 2. And we're now coming to market with a nonavalent or a 9-valent vaccine. And I think that that's a tribute to the commitment that Merck has, because we could win with 4 against 2, but the 4 only protects against about 73% or so of cervical cancers. I'm looking at Margie, and now our nonavalent will get us over 90%, and so that's really going to be important. We can really think about almost eliminating cervical cancer.
Hello, my name is Kathy, and I just graduated from Rutgers University.
Oh, fantastic.
I'm very luckily this January I got an externship with Merck, and I work at the global procurement at the White House headquarters, and I'm so excited to see you in person.
That's not what people usually say when I come into a room, especially around budget time.
Currently, I already have a full-time job. So I'm very interested in 2 areas when I was interning there. First of all is emerging market, and second of all is corporate responsibilities. Because I've been talking to some colleagues that I've been working with, and a lot of people said they choose this job because what they are doing is really contribute to the whole, human being. So they do think something they did can contribute to their, the whole world. And I've been very impressed by this kind of speech. And I originally come from Beijing, China as an international student, and I know there's a lot of manufacturing or the factories are based in different area of China. So my question is that according to different regulations and politics, so how do you, overcome or manage all the difference and to do some like risk and mitigation things?
It's a great question.
Thanks.
That's another part of what I was saying when I said, we know how to do business in certain places. It's a well-worn groove. We know exactly how to do business, how to get permits, etc. We're learning as we go into some of these countries and make investments in places like China and India and other places, Brazil. And we're learning as we go along. We have a manufacturing facility that we're putting up in China. We announced that we're building one of our big global R&D centers in Beijing. So we believe that you have to go where the talent is. We're an intellectual capital-based business, and at the end of the day, you can't ignore markets like China, not just because there's sales potential, but because the human need is there and the human talent is there. So we do it very carefully, is how I would answer your question. When we make these investments, we make them slowly and over time to make sure that we're actually getting a return on our shareholder dollars. Okay? Oh.
Hi, I'm Jeffrey. I'm a senior working with Dr. Adel Mahmud on rotavirus vaccines. And I had the privilege of traveling to Ghana last summer and learning a lot about the different rotavirus vaccines available in the world. And as you know, Rototech is a pentavalent vaccine, and GSK has a monovalent vaccine out there in the world.
Once again.
But what I learned is that a lot of developing countries are sort of going for GSK's monovalent vaccine for a variety of reasons. But despite them being very similar in terms of costs, I guess what GSK had was this vaccine vial monitor that told whether or not the vaccine went outside of 2 to 8 degrees Celsius.
Right.
Very good point. And so I guess my question is, in addition to kind of the funding issues that Merck is trying to attack in these emerging markets, what about these kind of infrastructural issues as well?
So I went through it quickly, but one of the capabilities that I was talking about is formulation, product formulation. And so to the extent that we can make these products not require, for example, a cold chain, they become much more valuable in those parts of the world than if they have to be refrigerated for a period of time. If we can make them in larger quantities other than individual vials so that you can do mass vaccination, they become much more valuable in those parts of the world. Let me give you a piece of data, and it's not something that I'm proud of. Merck manufactures about 175 million doses of vaccines a year. I believe Glaxo manufactures well over 1 billion doses of vaccines during the course of the year. And that's partially because they were more oriented towards that part of the world. And that's what I meant when I said we are trying to retrofit a model that was designed for the West to now serve the world. That was my Porsche example. So my manufacturing colleagues, I will tell you, are extraordinarily committed to doing all of those things, either ourselves or in partnerships with people like in India who can manufacture low-cost vaccines in a form which makes them used in that part of the world. And I can promise you this, as we develop vaccines going into the future, we will develop them as global vaccines in the first place, rather than trying to retrofit something into a model that it wasn't designed to do. Okay?
Well, thanks for the extremely wonderful presentation. I have 2 questions. First, in looking forward, projecting sustainability, how do you envision the potential impact on these programs if the United States started paying for drugs at the same cost basis that Canada does, number one? And number 2, inasmuch as the ROI from developing nations is well insufficient to support the R&D efforts that you've described without the quotes, subsidies, unquotes, provided by us. How would you see that as going forward?
Okay, those are great questions. So let me start by saying, if we start charging, or if we start trying to pay for drugs on the same level as Canada, our business model will be gone, not just our ability to serve that part of the world. I started off by saying, as the CEO of Merck, I've been personally challenged in my role in trying to continue to invest in R&D at the level that we're investing in. And that's why we have to continue to have a sustainable profit, because it's that profit that funds the R&D, as you were suggesting in your question. And if we take away that level of profitability, we are going to take away the ability to invest in the next Alzheimer's drug. I think as it relates to the emerging markets or the developing world, the way that I think about those markets is I have to invest a certain amount of capital to bring a product to market in the West anyway. If I can expand my capacity or my production capacity, let's say by another 100 million doses, and I can do that without losing money, and if I can do that with a small amount of profit, that marginal cost is not the big cost. It's, as you were suggesting, the reason why U.S. citizens complain is they feel like they have to make the fundamental investment to get the drug to market, and other people get it at a much cheaper price. I happen to believe that that's morally okay as long as you're pricing it really to those people's ability to pay. Where I really have a problem is when Germany wants to be charged the way Bulgaria is charged. That's my bigger problem. I don't have as much of a problem with charging Bulgarians what they can pay. But when other countries around the world that are in a much different income strata say, well, I want the cheapest price, then that becomes sort of a race to the bottom. Okay?
Hi, great talk. As the industry is moving toward personalized medicine, this potentially could really change the way that you do business. For example, America could be, right now it's one single market, but in the future it could be 320 million markets.
Right.
How do you, what are some of the things that you're thinking to transform your company to adapt to these changes?
I think that's an excellent question. I think that I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to say all the ways in which personalized medicine will change our business model, but I think historically the pharmaceutical industry has been successful at coming up with products that are used in very large, heterogeneous populations. Now, I think we will be able to have the means through human genetics testing and other things to figure out exactly which people are responsive to which drugs. By the way, that will help us because think of all the drugs that failed for side effects, that if we really knew who had the side effect, that drug could be a good drug for all the other people in that population. So I think it involves a trade-off. On the one hand, you wouldn't have as many drugs for large populations, but the development costs theoretically should be a lot lower if you're going for a targeted population with a genetic marker that suggests that this population would be highly responsive to the drug. So I see this as a difference in the company's business model, but I think it'll be a positive one for patients and it'll be a positive one for the industry.
And I just wanted to comment, I know the work that Merck's done with, for example, the Wissahick and Watershed, having grown up there on Chief Lane, spent a lot of time in that area, Ambler, I guess mostly your Bluebell as well as West Point facilities, as well as your background. You know, I used to go down to Temple games and Sunny Hill events, and you know, it's to me it's a Ben Carson analogy with respect to your background.
Thank you.
Just commend in that vein. Two questions with respect to the S&P merger. That was somewhat dilutive to tangible book. Second, with respect to which you spearheaded, the Vioxx defenses, was that done mostly internal, or did you utilize somebody like Nina Gustafson at Pepper?
Yeah. So the Vioxx defense, we actually used lots of very terrific trial lawyers around the country. I think we were very successful in part because we picked good people, and you mentioned Nina, but we had a bunch of trial lawyers, and there's a magazine called The American Lawyer, which will bore all the rest of you. But it had a cover story about some of our lawyers, and I was very pleased that there were the 3 very powerful women trial lawyers that came out of this Vioxx thing. So Nina's one, but we used other ones. On the S&P transaction, I think that we've created value for our shareholders. I think we were able to do that deal at a time when the market was at a low point, and so, in fact, we didn't overpay for it. We were able to use capital outside the United States, and so we didn't have to use a lot of equity, and I think it's actually been something that's created shareholder value overall.
One more question. Thanks for your time. I'll keep it short and sweet because everyone wants their desserts. I'm a PhD student here at Princeton, and I know myself and my colleagues are all very concerned with jobs after we get out of here, with, after 4 years of cultivating the skills to do the important research that you talked about. So I think everyone recognizes that there's an alarming trend of research jobs moving outside of the US. And of course it makes business sense to some degree. So I'm wondering how you, as both an American but leader of a multinational company, feel about that, where you think things are going, and how you address that.
That's an excellent question, too. Thank you. So I have a really good answer to that, because as we've begun to think about where we want to locate our R&D globally, we've actually concentrated more in the United States. We've closed facilities in Europe and other places. Beijing is sort of the one exception to that, because, frankly, what's happening in China, particularly in chemistry, you've got to be there. Even in the jobs in the United States, at Merck, if you pick an area like biostatistics, something like 70% of our biostatisticians are Chinese nationals anyway. So we have to get them from China to come to the United States. So it makes sense to hire some Chinese to do biostatistician work in China. But by and large, we are concentrating our research in the United States because we still have the finest institutions of higher education and technical and in the humanities, like this institution. So from my perspective, I'm very happy to locate my R&D where the brightest minds are. It's not about labor costs, it's about where the brightest people are. Thank you very much for your generous listening.